Ladies and gentlemen, our program is about to begin. Please take your seats and silence your phone. Again, our program is about to begin. Please take your seats and silence your phone. Thank you.
Testing, testing. Oh, it's getting better. Good evening. We love to see everybody having a great time together, but if you in the back would make your way into the main room here, we have plenty of seats. Just as in church, there's plenty up front, so please join us. Good evening, everyone. Oh, try that again. Good evening, everyone. Hey, that was good. We've never had that before. It's a first. That's great. I'm Janet Dolan. I'm a member of the Minnesota Peace Initiative Committee. And on behalf of the Norway House Board and our committee, I want to welcome all of you to our fall program. And also, and I'll try not to look up like they're all up in the corner, but welcome to all of you who are joining us online. We appreciate you taking part in the program as well. For those of you who are attending for the first time, and there are a few of you, I see a lot of familiar faces, but I do know there are some people here for the first time. Let me tell you who we are and why we do these programs. Norway is a trusted global peacemaker. Therefore, the Minnesota Peace Initiative provides a forum to delve deeply into the challenging global issues around us. Like James Madison, we believe a well-informed electorate is essential to an effective democracy. We bring in experts, as we have here this evening, to share their knowledge and their insights so that we can all become better informed citizens. The topic of our spring program, for many of you who were there, was the explosive growth of data centers and their immense demand for energy to support them. And as we sent you off for what turned out to be a lovely summer, we told you that our program this fall would be on the sources of energy needed to support this rapidly growing demand for energy. However, that growing demand for energy is moving so fast that our program tonight is not on all the various sources of energy that could be available, but on one, nuclear energy. The question is, are we willing to rethink our past resistance to nuclear energy and at least consider using it to meet the energy needs of our technology industry? Just since our spring program, we have gone from, can we think about using nuclear power, to how do we safely use nuclear power to meet the growing appetite for these new technologies. So what is moving so fast? The explosion of AI cannot be overstated. Every Google search now begins with an AI answer first. Every week, there's more written about the AI revolution and what it will mean. Questions range from, where are we going to get the energy, to how many jobs are going to be lost due to AI, to what are the implications of AI for our economy and for our work culture. While there are many questions about AI, the ones we are focusing on tonight are those about energy, such as, do we have a grid that can support all of this sudden demand for data centers? If not, how are we going to build it in time? What sources of energy can provide 24/7 reliable energy needed to support data centers? The need for clean, steady, reliable sources of energy has users looking to nuclear energy. Therefore, we felt it imperative to focus on nuclear energy tonight. We appreciated your feedback from this spring's program, which did include a discussion of crypto and blockchain technology. We appreciate your comment that we got a little technical. While nuclear energy is technical, we're going to try to focus less on the how and more on the what does it mean for us. What does it cost? Is it safe? How may it impact those who live closer to a reactor? How may it impact any of us? We also acknowledge that we are the Minnesota Peace Initiative. We focus on topics of peace and global security. The link between nuclear energy and global security and peace is huge. While we are seeking enough energy to grow and support our technology industry, we are not alone. AI will be a significant tool for national defense, international intelligence, and a whole range of areas that all go directly to the security of America, of us, our children, and our grandchildren. This is a race, just like the space race was 60 years ago. China has declared that it will rapidly build data centers needed to lead the world in technology growth, and it will support that growth with whatever energy resources are needed. We are in a new race, one that affects us and our global security, as well as can we keep the lights on? As we delve into the topic of nuclear energy, we realize that this topic can be unsettling. Our goal is not to argue for or against nuclear energy. Rather, our goal is simply to bring you up to date on the current science and know-how on nuclear energy so that you are well informed as you see the demand for nuclear energy grow. But make no mistake, we are going through a period of great change. Your angst and uncertainty are all well-founded. So, as Betty Davis said in that very famous movie, All About Eve, fasten your seatbelts, folks. It's gonna be a bumpy night. With that, it's now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. We have brought together 3 experts who work every day in the areas of nuclear policy. Each of them brings a different perspective on the topic. Each will make a brief opening statement. We will then have a panel discussion before opening it up to questions from you. We will begin with Nick Touran. Nick is a nuclear engineer and consultant with expertise in advanced nuclear reactor design and development and the history of nuclear power. After receiving his PhD from the University of Michigan, he spent 15 years at TerraPower in Seattle, working on core design, business development, software development, and configuration management. He's a licensed professional engineer. Nick has been active in public education around nuclear power since 2006 as the founder of whatisnuclear.com. I urge you to visit his website. I spent an entire weekend on it one weekend a few weekends ago, and I can assure you that you will learn everything you need to know about nuclear energy there. Nick is the perfect person to open our program with a brief tutorial on nuclear energy, how it works, how safe it is, and why it is in such demand by tech companies and others interested in working towards a zero carbon footprint. In 400 BC, I'm sure many of you know this, a Greek philosopher named Democritus first proposed the concept of the atom. He hypothesized that everything in the universe is made up of tiny, indivisible particles called atoms. Well, we, the human race, have been fascinated by atoms ever since. So, Nick, you need to tell us everything that we've learned about that little atom since 400 BC. It's my pleasure to introduce Nick Touran.
First thing we learned is they're not actually indivisible. So, yeah, thank you. Really great to be here. Thanks all for coming out. I will try to give you the fastest rundown on nuclear power you've ever seen. But I want to start by just talking about energy in the big picture. And energy is defined formally as the ability to do work. But I prefer a different definition, which is that it's a replacement for the labor and time of humans and animals. And as a replacement like that, it gives us freedom, and it can lead to enduring peace. And let me just sort of demonstrate, why I think that. So on the top are low energy things. So if you do construction, low energy, it's very hard work. You're carrying gravel around, you're moving blocks. But if you utilize energy for construction, you're just flicking your wrist in a tower crane or an excavator or a dump truck. It's an absolute game changer. For farming, how many of you farm 100% of the food you and your family consume? Zero. But not that long ago, very many people had to, but because we've utilized energy for fertilizer, for farm machinery, now a tiny population can feed the world. And that's, again, because we utilize energy. Cleaning with modern plumbing is a lot easier than walking a couple miles to the river and spending your whole day doing cleaning. And again, it gives us freedom because you can still travel the Oregon Trail all summer, but you don't have to. You can still farm if you want, but you don't have to. And so this is where this quality of life thing comes in. And now we're seeing with AI, energy can think for us too, and it can create art, and it can do PowerPoints and spreadsheets for us. So it really is a really interesting dynamic we're in. So nuclear energy is just energy that can do that we get from the nucleus of the atom. And just the only physics I'll mention is that an atom we now know is an electron cloud, and in the dead center of that electron cloud there's this concentrated mass of two particles, protons and neutrons, and that's the atomic nucleus. And there's energy in there. In particular in the small atoms, like types of hydrogen, if you fuse them together, you can release fusion energy. Or if you're lazier and you just want easy energy, you use the heaviest atoms we know, uranium and thorium, and you split them, and that's called fission, which is what I'll mostly be talking about. So how did the energy get in there? Well, billions of years ago, neutron star mergers and supernovas put a bunch of energy in there. And it's been sitting there ever since. And if you go out into the downtown or just around wherever, you can find rocks that have uranium minerals in them. I happen to have a little uranium here. And this has just been sitting there, kicking out just a tiny amount of its energy for billions of years. And this is a Geiger counter. Whoops. You should hear a few clicks. That's just background radiation. That's coming from cosmic rays and from the potassium in my bones and so on. But if you bring the uranium up to the sensor, you can see it's kicking out little pieces of radiation, and that's a tiny amount of energy that's stored within that uranium that has been leaking out for billions of years since it was created in that neutron star merger. Well, this isn't making electricity, so what do we do? So to turn this into electricity, we have to make a machine called a nuclear reactor that gets this energy out much faster. All right, but before I go into that, what's so interesting about nuclear energy? The key differentiator between nuclear and any other kind of energy is that there's an astounding amount of energy in a small amount of mass. There's 2 million times more energy in like a handful of nuclear fuel than there would be in a handful of any chemical fuel like gasoline or fat or so on. Here's a graph from XKCD. It's really astounding. And the implications of this are just profound. If you have that much more energy in a small mass, if you just dig up a small amount of uranium and you can power a city for a year, that's a very small impact on that environment. If you then discharge that small amount of uranium after it comes out of the reactor, that's a very tiny amount of waste. It is toxic nuclear waste, but it's extremely small, 2 million times smaller. If you load a dump truck of nuclear fuel into a reactor and power 1 million people for a year, compare that to a coal plant of the same power takes a mile-long coal train every single day. Okay, so like the implication of this is huge. And it has further implications in that you can run a reactor anywhere in any conditions. We run reactors underwater for submarines. We've put reactors in space. We put a reactor on an airplane and flew it around. And we put one in an ice base in Greenland and powered a military base at one point. So, and it works rain or shine on a tiny land area, and it doesn't have significant emissions. So this is why today people who are trying to get more power want something that can run 24/7 on any site and has very minimal impact on the environment around it. So that's kind of the key crux of nuclear power. And like, how does it turn out when you ask about like, when you run the numbers, is nuclear actually safe? Is it actually clean? Well, it turns out there's lots of people who run these things called life cycle analyses, where you look cradle to grave from mining, construction, operation, decommissioning, and final waste disposal. And if you look at, on the left, death rate per kilowatt hour generated by different power sources, you'll see that, wow, nuclear energy, even though you've all heard of nuclear accidents, but when you look at the total numbers, and compare to the fact that about 8 million people die from air pollution-related health effects from fossil and biofuel, nuclear is as safe as wind or solar. This is surprising, but this is not very controversial. And then on the emissions, when you split atoms, there's no carbon dioxide being generated. Maybe you have a little bit during construction, but in full life cycle, it's the lowest. It's as low as you can go. And that just gets better as you add more nuclear, because you'll eventually do nuclear-powered construction, and so this will just zero out. So it is truly extremely safe and extremely clean, despite what we see on The Simpsons and so on. So if that's still on. All right, so let's get back to how we actually get electricity. So that uranium I have, you have to crush that up and do some refining. You can't just throw rocks into the reactor. You have to do some processes to turn it into a fuel form. This is a common one. This is called uranium dioxide. It's a ceramic, like a teacup. These can withstand high temperatures and high radiation in a nuclear reactor. So then we put these. To get a uranium atom to split, you have to throw a neutron at it. It's like a match for nuclear fuel. If you throw a neutron at uranium, sometimes it'll split. It just spontaneously splits. And it just so happens that it also, when it splits, it shoots out 2 or 3 more neutrons. And so you can set up a chain reaction and split billions upon billions of atoms and heat the thing up quite a bit. And so now you've got a chunk of uranium and it's heating up because the atoms are splitting. Great. But, you have to put uranium close to you have to put uranium near the other uranium so that those neutrons can leak in and split the nearby uranium. So you put them into these like fuel assemblies, and you put channels between them so you can pump a coolant, because you can't just let the thing heat up forever. So you hook a hose up to it and you run a coolant like water or a gas like helium or molten salt or liquid metal, whatever. You just pump some coolant past that, and that prevents the stuff from heating up. That way it heats up the coolant and moves the coolant somewhere else to make electricity. You take a bunch of assemblies like that and put them together into a core. You can see a person kind of top right. This is a big core. This would power a city of 1 million people for a year and a half just off that load. So that's like a typical nuclear core. And then people say that nuclear plants are just a fancy way of boiling water, and it is kind of true. Like, you just take the core. I should run a laser pointer. But the core is over there on the left. That heats up the coolant that's being pumped through. That eventually just makes steam. You now have steam in a pipe. You put a pinwheel in that pipe and the steam blows over it, so it starts spinning. So now you've converted cosmic nuclear heat into rotational energy. And at that point, you're all the way there. You just put a rotating magnets on the other end of that shaft, and off it goes. So now, and you can make electricity, and you condense it down, keep on going. So that's it. That's how you make electricity from nuclear. I should mention, and we'll talk about this more in the Q&A because I'm out of time here, but when the atom splits, you do get these two other sort of smaller atoms. Those are called fission products, and those are radioactive. That causes two issues. One is the safety concern. If you lose power, you have to remove heat from those things. You can't just turn a reactor all the way off. You can turn it most of the way off, but there's a little bit of energy that's still coming out of there, and you have to cool that, and that's the primary driver behind safety concerns. So you have to build safety systems that will cool that even if the power goes out. And then the long-term concern is that of nuclear waste. Some of this energy comes out 10,000 years later, and so how do you get into a situation where it's appropriate to make that? And I will argue, just as a preview, that the way we do it now is we put the waste in these big dry casks in the parking lot. You can stand right next to them. They sit out there for a couple years. And the plan is, and like Finland is making progress on this, you eventually will either recycle that in special recycling reactors, breeder reactors, or you can put it in a deep geologic repository, which Finland is just about to open the first commercial one. And it's, in my opinion, it's totally appropriate. It's a very small amount of material. It's reasonable to put it down there. It hasn't hurt anyone. It's unlikely that it'll hurt people in the future. And considering that you're preventing 8 million deaths per year, and avoiding climate change, it's a pretty good trade-off. So that's my tutorial, and look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Nick, for that very informative tutorial. I also want to thank Nick for being here tonight, because Nick and his wife just had a baby about 2 weeks ago, a little baby girl named Ray. So I actually woke up in a cold sweat this weekend and thought, oh my God, what if his wife doesn't let him come? So I appreciate very much you being here, and congratulations.
Thanks.
Yes. It's now my pleasure to introduce Peter Fried. Peter has over 20 years of experience working at the nexus of clean energy and climate. He provides strategic advice to companies and investors aiming to optimize business performance and climate outcomes within the energy sector. Peter serves as a research fellow at the Sustainable Finance Initiative at Stanford's Dolan School of Sustainability, where he works on innovative strategies to maximize the impact of companies in combating climate change. Additionally, he is a senior advisor to the Energy Transition and Sustainability team at Warburg Pincus, a large global growth firm. In his most recent role, Peter spent a decade as Director of Energy Strategy at Meta, where he led the efforts to advance grid decarbonization and reliability, aligning with Meta's data center energy and net zero objectives. Peter was a founding board member of the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance, and he holds a BS in Earth Systems from Stanford University. It's my pleasure to introduce Peter.
Well, thank you so much to Janet, the Minnesota Peace Initiative, Norway House, for having us here. This is a wonderful and interesting conversation. I hope we get all of you involved in it. Janet talked a little bit about my background, and I think as we think about, or at least as I think about why I'm here tonight, you all have obviously been engaging in a dialogue around what's happening in the electricity system right now. And in my role at Meta, and certainly in my continued role in and around the industry, it is almost impossible to think about nuclear energy and not think about what's happening with load growth associated with data centers. That was front and center in my old job, and one of the things that was most exciting about that job was running the team that explored Meta's engagement with advanced energy technologies, and I got a really interesting front row seat to where a lot of those technologies were. I left the company in April of last year, and it feels like essentially forever has gone by since that time. So much has changed, but it's still really interesting to see what they're doing and where the industry is going. I think as it relates to this conversation, we've got a world-leading expert in the technical side of this. I think a lot about my own experience commercially, why companies might make a decision to deploy these technologies or buy energy from these technologies, which ultimately, at least in this country, is one of the main reasons why any generating technology gets built, is someone decides to step up and buy the power from it, which allows the company that's going to develop it to go out into the market and go to investors and banks and get the money that's required to build these projects, because they are extremely expensive. And one of the things that I think is so interesting about this moment, and I don't know how much detail you all went into on AI demand when you talked about it coming into the summer, but what I'll say is that I am someone who is very, very bullish AI. I think the technology is going to be transformative. I also think that it's going to drive a significant amount of new data center growth in the United States, and it's coming very quickly. And so right now what we're seeing is that people are deploying a lot of fossil generating technology to meet that demand, a lot of natural gas generating technology in particular. And I think about this as a window. If AI demand is not going away anytime soon, we will continue to build fossil generating technology until we have other, what we would call clean, firm generating technology. So I have long been a great proponent of wind, solar, storage, and other renewable energy technologies, but they don't meet all of the needs associated with a data center load. And so we have this window of time. How quickly can we get other clean, firm generating sources onto the system so that we can begin to slow down some of the deployments of fossil energy? And so that means we have to think seriously about nuclear, along with advanced geothermal, long duration battery storage, and other technologies. What we've seen to date is that essentially every large tech company has begun to make bets in this space. Most of those bets have involved picking one or two equipment manufacturers on small modular reactors. I'm sure Nick can tell us all about what that exactly means in a little bit. But they've picked a technology, they've undergone a commercial contract, and using those contracts, they're going to try and help get those reactors to market a little bit faster. Meta has also taken an interesting approach. This began under my tenure, so I feel some ownership over it, although they've taken it much further than I ever imagined that it would go, putting a request for proposals into the market for 4 gigawatts of technology. 4 gigawatts is enough power to power 4 million homes. So that's quite a lot of energy. We haven't seen what they're going to announce yet, but that proposal was designed in such a way, at least in my mind, to think about how you can bring this technology to scale and reduce the cost. So we need to get lots of these reactors out onto the market to help bring the cost down, and also get them out quickly because the demands continue to grow for electricity. So as we look at that, I think that it is true that up until very recently, most of the reactors built in the United States were built by utilities. The last reactor built in the United States, the Vogtle plant in Georgia, was built by a regulated utility. The next nuclear power plants in this country will not be built by utilities. They will be built by private contractors, they'll be built by private developers, serving the needs of commercial customers for heat, for power, et cetera. And I think one of the things that we should all be thinking about is what that trajectory is likely to look like, the interface between customers and their utilities, and what the drivers are going to be for seeing scaled, rapid deployment of nuclear technology in the future. So I'm looking forward to engaging with all of you on that, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Peter. I feel like we got kind of an insider's view there. So thank you very much. Our final panelist is a guest from Norway. When possible, we try to bring a global perspective to our topics, since we all share this same small planet, and whatever happens in one country can certainly affect all of us. So we're very honored and very lucky to have with us this evening Pål Arne Davidsen. Pål Arne is the former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in Norway. He is currently partner and senior director at Ruud Petersen Group, one of the largest public affairs firms in Europe. He advises clients in a range of sectors such as transport, infrastructure, energy, and nuclear industries. He has previously served as foreign and energy policy advisor in the Norwegian Parliament, and he held a senior position in the Norwegian Agency for Development Corporation. Pål Arne has also been a visiting fellow in the United States Congress, as well as at the Center of Strategic and International Studies and at the Elliott School of International Affairs in Washington, D.C. So we are very pleased, Pål, to have you here, and we look forward to hearing your remarks. Pål Arne Davidsen.
We need two things. We need the US, as well as the rest of Europe, to stand by its NATO commitments. We need abundant, reliable, safe energy to become less dependent on authoritarian states. This is USS Gerald Ford that was recently in Norway and Norwegian territorial waters. USS General Ford has a nuclear reactor, an A1B, that can be compared to a small modular reactor. Security is peace, and security and peace are both closely linked to energy. In my very, very short presentation here, I'm addressing to you why is this debate coming up now, and why is it coming up in a country of mine that is abundant of renewable energy, hydropower, oil and gas. We're providing 50% of the gas supplies to Germany. Why is this debate coming up now? And why do we want to switch this, the picture of Norway, waterfalls, fjords, with something like this? It is about perceptions. And if we don't get the perceptions right, my prediction is that we will not achieve nuclear, we will not achieve a value chain of small modular reactors in Norway. It's about perceptions, and perceptions matters. We're not discussing Fukushima, we're not discussing Nagasaki or Hiroshima. We are today discussing small modular reactors. This is the debate in Norway. This is the debate that we have in Europe. So, to the EU, what's happening? One word about that. We have not yet seen how the war in Ukraine has shifted the whole dimension of energy security, not only in Europe, not only in Norway, but in the whole world. There will be, in the foreseeable future, a massive ask, a massive demand for reliable energy, and that reliable energy should not come from Russia or any other country that is not playing by the rules. Norway, heavily dependent on hydropower, up to 89%. We use that for domestic consumption, while the gas, we provide energy security to the rest of Europe. What is happening on nuclear, on SMR in Norway? We have established Norwegian nuclear municipalities where we ensure that we will avoid the not in my backyard policy. We have to be working bottom up, not top down on nuclear. Norwegian Nuclear Energy has entered into MOUs with at least 10, 15 companies in the SMR value chain. We have a Nuclear Energy Commission that will deliver its conclusions in the spring next year. my take and my advice to the companies that we advise is do not sit and wait for the Commission to come with its conclusions. Election results. Tremendous shift in public perceptions. We now have a majority in Parliament. We have a majority among the public supporting nuclear. This is the time to act, but it is about costs, and we need to get the costs down. We need to develop a regulatory environment. We need attractiveness. We need a diversification of the value chain. We need many companies to come and offer their solutions. And of course, we need to address the difficult questions that local people, local population have. What's in it for me? Why should I have this in my backyard? And ultimately, it's about political will, and it's about peace and security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pål Arne. You are enthusiastic about your subject. I'd like to see that from Norway. We want to thank all three of our speakers for a terrific opening to our program. And we're now going to turn to the question and answer period. I'm going to start with a few questions, but each of you should have found on your chair a blue card, which then is white on the side and allows you to ask questions. And if you would begin submitting them, I will start weaving them into my questions for the panelists. We want to hear from as many of you as possible. So just pass your questions to the middle or to the aisle here, and we have a number of people who will be collecting the questions, so we make it as easy for you as possible. I'm going to begin with you, Pål Arne. You've told us a lot about, or you did a great job of sort of laying the foundation of how the war in Ukraine has sort of realigned Europe and their energy sources and therefore their energy demands. I would also just like you as a kind of a link to our spring program on data centers. Are you also across Europe experiencing what we are in the States, which is the growth of data centers necessary for all of the AI and other energy needs? So is that happening at the same time as you're also having to deal with kind of a realignment of your sourcing of energy?
Yes, yes, very much. We have a situation in Norway where we have, or at least we had a year ago, skyrocketing energy prices, and especially in the southern parts of the country. And we were in a situation where we actually had to export from northern Norway to northern Sweden, from northern Sweden down to southern Sweden, and then from southern Sweden into southern Norway, because the grid is so weak that we are not able to fulfill demands. And to your question, Janet, yes, we have seen a tremendous increase and attractivity also in Norway for data center and data center value chains. And of course, these are very energy intensive. So basically the decisions that we take today, we will be able to harvest not tomorrow, but in 2035 or 2040. So in order to have those data centers, whether you use them for TikTok or for critical infrastructure, we need to make those decisions today and not wait.
Okay, so you're seeing the growth too. Okay. Peter, I'd also like to do a bridge question with you to our spring program. Again, it just kind of anchors everybody. You indicated that even in the year since you left Meta, there's been a lot of change. So, but I'm always curious, when you have any kind of what they call crisis happen, how did this just sneak up on everybody? So I'm just curious, did the tech companies just never estimate how much energy it was going to take? Or have they been banging on the doors of utility companies for 5 or 6 years saying, this is coming, get ready? I mean, how did we get where there's just been no investment apparently, and then suddenly we have this huge demand?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's a little bit of both. There's no smoking gun on this though, actually. I think two things are true. One, this country overbuilt generation to a pretty significant degree in the vicinity of 2010. And that was right around the time when data centers were starting to come onto the system. Data centers were one of the only opportunities for load growth in the United States. So if you are a utility who makes your money principally by adding new things, spending money on the grid, that's the way the utility business model works, it was a great opportunity. And I will tell you, as someone who used to do data center siting, it was a nice job. Utilities were happy to see you, communities were happy to see you by and large. We contributed to the tax base, and there was enough generation on the system because we'd overbuilt to serve those relatively easily and for not a significant amount of cost. I would say LLMs, large language models that power AI, took almost everybody in the industry by surprise. And I think the pace at which they have been growing has also taken everyone by surprise. And so my team first started flagging for me, I want to say, maybe in the fall of 22, certainly by the spring of 23, like, hey, we're starting to see some weird things, you know, like this growth thing is popping up in a lot of places, and we're starting to get questions from our utility partners about what's happening. By the time I left in April of 2024, people were talking in a very significant way about load growth, and it has only continued from there. And so I think both things are true. The utilities didn't have to deal with it for 20 years, and also it came much faster and in a way that people weren't expecting. And I'll just briefly say, because I think this is relevant, the whole idea here is you put more chips, more computer chips in the same place, and you get a better AI training outcome. That is the hypothesis that is driving all of these very large data center campuses that people are chasing. We'll see what happens. It's entirely possible that, and I'm not a software engineer, but that paradigm may shift, and we may find that we can do the training in a disaggregated way. And that might change the way that we deploy data centers. Probably doesn't reduce the amount of electricity that we're consuming, but it might mean that at some point in the future we're spreading them out a lot more as opposed to having these really giant things in one place.
Okay, I have to take a little credit for something. I told our panelists at our little get-together before our meeting that we are going to have good questions. I never dreamed we were going to have the quantity of questions. We have never had this many questions on any subject. So this is, I bragged, but warned them that this is an audience that's going to have really good questions. So, Nick, I told you this one was going to come in. Okay. Has there been some kind of major improvement that has addressed the safety of the energy source? Is that why we're now more willing to talk about this than we have in the past? Didn't we just talk about that?
Yes, that's a fantastic question. And it's a kind of nuanced multi-answer. The answer basically is no. There hasn't been a revolution in safety in nuclear power. What happened historically is that in the 50s and 60s, we built probably 50 different types of reactors, different coolants, different types of moderators that slow the neutrons down, different fuel forms, helium-cooled, liquid metal-cooled, all the different combinations. And every one of them was supposed to be cheaper and safer than the next. And they had this big competition. And the water-cooled reactors really won the competition. They were safe enough. They were very cost effective. They were easy to run, and easy to maintain, easy to build. And they just and all the other ones had some kind of technical problem. They shut down, even though they were notionally safer, they were harder to maintain. They shut down all the time. There's a great New York Times headline in 1988 about a reactor in Colorado called Fort St. Vrain. And the headline said, "World's safest reactor shutting down because it never runs," because it was always down for maintenance. And so what's really happening now is people are bringing back those older, potentially safer reactor concepts and saying like, wait a minute, with modern materials or with new control systems, like maybe this time they will run better, maybe they'll be safer. And so it's really it's like a redo of reactors that we tried in the 50s. And so that's, and there's no guarantee that they're gonna be cheaper or safer this time. There's plenty of interest, there's a lot of work going on, there's reason to believe some of them should break through. But on the other hand, the water-cooled reactors are actually quite safe. I mean, I showed the numbers. Those were mostly the water-cooled reactors. It's hard to be safer than that, but you still don't want like a Fukushima type event happening every 20 years. Even if it's killing far fewer than other energy sources, it's still not a great event. So there's still some value in having these like potentially safer reactors. So hopefully that answers the question.
Pål Arne, I have a question. Do you think Germany will reverse their anti-nuclear stance? And maybe I would say, speak candidly, but also I guess you could expand that a little bit. If they do, or maybe even if they don't, but are most of the countries in Europe going to at least consider it or think about it, or how far along are they? It sounds like Norway's certainly taking the first steps. So.
I hope you were going to ask about France, but I can start with Germany.
Well, we could combine it.
my take on this is that everything is up for grabs. Everything is changing, and what is a reality today is not necessarily going to be a reality tomorrow. We see, since I mentioned France, let's start there. They developed from the oil crisis in 1973. You probably seen the pictures of the test, the nuclear tests, heavily controversial. Algeria, French Polynesia. They're still colored somehow by this. But France is now throughout the Njord value chain and the Njord project with Électricité de France. They're now trying to take a lead in Europe on this, and they are saying that we will have an SMR value chain up and running by 2035. We'll see if that happens. Things are also changing, yes, in Germany. And of course, Germany, just like Japan, they have the war still, Second World War still quite close. Even it's over 80 years ago. But things are changing, and maybe later we'll have the opportunity to discuss regulations. But I just recently, was it yesterday, 2 days ago, we witnessed Chancellor Merz saying, which I think is a critical issue to this, the over-bureaucracy and red tape of the EU when it comes to regulations. And it might be the case that you need to find a balance between too little or too much. And when I worked in Congress, there was a joke, while the US is competing on innovation and technology, the EU is competing on regulations. So we need to find that balance. And I'm happy that Germany is at least on paper taking the lead, so that we will have more technology and we will have a diversification of the value chain on this.
Mm-hmm. Peter, you come from the private sector and you work in the private sector. Here's a good question, which is, if reactor operations are in private hands, how can we assure that profit-seeking will not result in shortcuts on safety?
Yeah, I mean, that is a fantastic question. And actually, I would say that I don't think anybody has a strong motivation to see an unsafe reactor. I will also say to the previous question that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is one of the preeminent bodies globally in terms of ensuring safe reactor design. So I think there has to be a balance between seeing private sector engagement on these things and making sure that all of the fail-safes are in place with respect to safety. I'm sure Nick has a lot to say on that. I will also say, I think even in circumstances where we are seeing people building reactors or commercially engaging with reactors, that in many cases the operation of those reactors will actually end up with power companies. So you may see somebody contracting for the development of reactor. It will be built by an engineering, procurement, and construction firm which is experienced in building nuclear reactors, so the same people that were building them in Georgia and elsewhere, and then ultimately those reactors will be operated by experienced nuclear operators. And so I think that's probably the model that we end up seeing, as opposed to, you know, somebody like Meta operating a nuclear reactor. Like, they have no interest in doing that. That's not going to happen.
Nick, we've got 2 or 3 questions all around timeline. You know, this all sounds great, but my gosh, what is the timeline? You know, how long is this going to take? So could you just kind of address, and let's kind of go, on the one hand, if a lot of the regulatory barriers are out of the way, in other words, this becomes a national policy and you just get a lot of cooperation, what does that look like in terms of bringing enough reactors online to meet the need? Or the other end of the spectrum, if there's just a lot of NIMBY, not in my backyard, and lots of hurdles, what does that look like? And anyway, kind of just try to lay out what you know about timeline for bringing this stuff online.
Yeah. So in project management, the best estimate is always if you find some related project that already happened, then and use that as your first order approximation. That's your best bet. But we can read between the lines. I will say there are currently 10 companies in this country that have all stated that they want to bring a new reactor online, a very small reactor online, on July 4th, 2026, which, you know, is in a couple months. And this is kind of a new thing that people are trying for, and there's debate about whether or not they'll be able to do that or not, or if they are able to do it, will it really be much of a reactor, or will it just be kind of a pile of fuel that doesn't make any electricity efficiently or even much heat? So that, like, right now, that's the soonest we'll see anything. There are some other there's a military microreactor project called Pele that is pretty far along. It's relatively small. It already has fuel. It's pretty much designed, and so that thing certainly could come online in the next year or 2. And then basically, like, there's a lot of error bars for a big gigawatt scale reactor. It's a complex machine. It's big. It's going to power 1 million homes. It's like building 1,000 microreactors. Those are going to take. In this country, like, the next one would probably take at least 6 years. It could go down to 4 years. The Japanese in the early 2000s were building them in about 36 months. They were extremely good at what they did, but, like, that's kind of the bar. It's going to be hard to beat 36 months for a big gigawatt scale reactor. But that's an amazing timeline. Everyone would be overjoyed if we could come anywhere near there compared to, you know, 15 years for the ones we just built in Georgia. So it's. Yeah, the answer is between, you know, 8 months from now and 15 years. That's kind of that's roughly where we're at. And the best thing to do is just, you know, there is so much support right now, and people are going out there and starting to build, and that's what we need to do. Once you build a few and you get good at building a certain model, there's experience around the world that shows if you just build that same model again and again, you can build them very quickly. That's how France inadvertently decarbonized their entire, or 70% of the electricity in 15 years. It's how Japan was going so fast and so on. So that's got to be the approach.
Pål, we're going to ask you to speak for the entire carbon industry, so just want you to know that. We have a number of questions, and of course, Norway is a major player in North Sea oil, and so are the carbon-based, you know, coal and gas companies in objecting to nuclear? Do they feel there's so much need here that they can play a role and nuclear, so they actually join arms and become partners on how do we create all the energy for the future that we can? What's the relationship between the carbon and fossil fuel industry and the nuclear? And if you want to throw in renewables, but that's up to you.
Yeah, that complicates matters. Okay, let's start with the oil and gas industry. Norway started developing on the continental shelf very early, late 60s, beginning of 70s. Very little known, but we had key competence coming from outside Norway, outside Europe. We had an Iraqi petroleum engineer that played a critical role in early stages of the Norwegian oil and gas adventure in developing the regulatory environment. I would say on oil and gas and nuclear, there are considerable lessons learned and potential spillover, both with regards to manpower, knowledge, and experience that we have from decades of oil and gas developments in Norway that we can use in the nuclear sector. I would even go so far as to say that if you look at a relatively new area, which is CCS, carbon capture storage, I would say that there are considerable lessons learned between these two sectors when it comes to decommissioning. Where do you get rid of how do you store the waste in a safe, reliable way? And there are discussions now when it comes to whether we should set up a decommissioning fund. And that discussion we have both in the CCS sector and we have in the nuclear sector. When it comes to the conflict line between the nuclear industry and the renewable energy industry, it's a bit more complicated, to say the least. There was a handshake just a couple of days ago, but the renewable energy sector, and especially offshore wind, has seen nuclear and the nuclear value chain as a competitor. And we're talking about, realistically, about the same timeline here. We will have free-floating offshore wind in the North Sea around maybe 2035. This is about the same time as we expect to have, if we make the decision soon, we expect to have SMR facilities. So obviously a handshake is not enough, but there are promising signs that the renewable energy industry will, by time, be more positive to nuclear.
Peter, you have a foot in the industry, but you also have a foot out of the industry. So we have a couple of questions from audience members who are saying, all this talk about energy for all this explosion of AI, maybe we should examine whether AI is a good thing for us. And are we just, is it a runaway, I'm putting words in their mouth, but is it a runaway train? And we're just questioning how do we create the energy for it, as opposed to having a good public discussion about what's the risk it causes to our society, and should we even be doing it? Do you want to weigh in and speculate at all if that has any likelihood of going anywhere?
I'd be happy to speculate on it because I think the answer is no. This is an unstoppable runaway train. I will say, I advise a number of large investors. This is the single most significant capital deployment opportunity in several generations. Like, it's not stopping. So just to be frank about that. On the other hand, I do think that there is a lot of very interesting and good work thinking about how to deploy this technology into making things cleaner, into advancing new technologies. As one small example, I have a friend who's very senior at one of the fusion companies. I know we're talking about fission today, and the fusion guys don't really like to mix up with fission, but nonetheless, I was talking to one of them in February of last year, and I said, "Are you guys thinking about AI for anything?" And they were like, "No. It's not interesting. The math is done on what we're doing." And 4 months later, he was coming to me and saying, "Could you help me get GPU capacity because we need to do AI?" So I think everywhere in the economy, we are starting to see opportunities where AI is helping with materials discovery, helping with drug discovery, a whole host of things where already today we will start to see advances. And so some of these advances will also radically change the face of the way that we are thinking about the energy solutions for all of this. So that's sort of the good side of that story. But the simple fact is AI is off to the races, and no one's pulling it back anytime soon.
Either one, the other two panelists want to comment on that at all?
I think we need to be realistic. From on the one side, you know, I could be abundant tomorrow by AI. We need a public affairs strategy for Equinor or for Norwegian Hydro. Put it into AI, and then you get you get something out in the other end, to put it bluntly. So what we're witnessing now in Norway is a phase where, especially the public sector, municipalities are using AI without, you know, check on delivery always. They told me in the foreign ministry, before you hand out something, like read it. Does it make sense? And we've had a couple of quite embarrassing, probably for the civil servants responsible. So just be realistic. And it is a train, and the train has left the platform. I think we will be on it, but we need also to be realistic on the applicability, and we need to do the human work in between the lines.
Yes.
I'll add into, just to go a little on the other side. In 1965, we built a nuclear power plant that was cost competitive with coal, and everybody made predictions that nuclear power was going to go completely exponential and power the entire planet by 1990. That may not have been as big a deal as what we're seeing with AI right now, but things happened that nobody saw coming. There were various incidents, there were nuclear accidents, there were supply chain issues and crunches and all sorts of things, and now nuclear makes about 4% of the total world's energy, not just electricity, but everything. And so just trying to make an analogy, like I could imagine things happening with AI where there's a weaponization that some country deploys an AI on our computers and we all disconnect, and there's sort of a major backlash against that kind of thing. I think that's within the realm of possibility, and that kind of thing could be a big bump in the road. I'm sure there's ways past it. I do think machines that can effectively think are extremely valuable and should be a major benefit overall. But I think there are certainly things that could happen that could really slow things down or change the overall trajectory from what we're currently predicting.
I want to move on to sort of the public side of it, the regulation and that. But before I do, I have just a question that I've always been wondering about. Is uranium, because it came from the Big Bang or whatever, is uranium available everywhere, or is it in limited supply in very discrete parts of the world, and are we just going to move from very discrete countries that had oil and became rich to a few countries that have uranium and become rich? What's the future going to be when we change to a different source of energy?
Yeah, great question. So if you ask Greenpeace, they'll tell you there's 5 years of uranium left. But if you ask me, it's about 4 billion years, and I'm right. and here's why. So, I mean, in terms of concentration, it isn't uniformly distributed in high concentration. The high concentration deposits of uranium minerals are spread all over the world, but they're not in every country. They're in like Kazakhstan, Australia, Canada, Namibia, places like that. There are types of reactors that we proved out in 1951 that are called breeder reactors, I mentioned. They're a little bit more exotic, but we know they work. They're a little bit expensive, but they don't need enrichment or anything. They can get all the energy out of both isotopes of uranium. I told you I wouldn't do more physics, but anyway, they are much, much more, hundreds of times more fuel efficient than the current generation reactors. And again, they're totally proven technologies. We've run a bunch of them. And so if you switch to that kind of reactor, you can imagine just running off of, there's a trace amount of uranium dissolved in seawater. And now people in China and Japan have started being able to extract uranium from seawater at prices that are like just 2 times more than current mined uranium costs. Well, that's everywhere. And in fact, if you go out and pick up a piece of average crustal granite, there's 20 times more nuclear energy in that granite than if you had this equivalent mass of pure coal in a coal plant if you were using a breeder reactor. So there's just such an astounding amount of energy if you
switch over to breeder reactors. So what's going to happen is, right now there's no shortage of uranium. If we build 5 times more reactors than we have today, we'll challenge the uranium supplies a little bit, and then breeder reactors will be economical, and we'll build breeder reactors, and we'll never run low on uranium again. We also have another element called thorium that can be used in breeder reactors, and overall it can power the whole world for, like, again, billions of years.
Well, I promised our audience we wouldn't get too technical, so I'm not going to ask you this question, but I want you to know how smart our audience is. Okay. Somebody said, what's the feasibility of thorium for reactors? So
I mean,
they came prepared.
We've run them before, and China has one running right now, so perfectly feasible.
Well, we've been speaking on, of course, the clock is moving faster than ever before, but we've talked a lot about just how it works, and if everything would go right, the timeline and all that kind of stuff. But let's talk about what has to go right. What role does anybody here have in being involved in the debate before their Public Utility Commission? And, Minnesota has a moratorium, that we've had since the 90s, and there's 8 other states that have a moratorium too. So what's the regulatory side of this? And Pål, if you would talk about Europe, then if you would talk about the U.S., just what do you see as, no problem, everybody's on board? I was surprised, as you guys told me a little bit before dinner, that we've had public policy at the national level by every administration back for 4 or 5 to invest in this. So maybe you could share a little bit of that too. But is this going to happen at the state levels? Is it going to be a national policy? What do you see is going to be necessary to move this forward? And then, Pål, if you would talk about what you see going on in Europe and what needs to be done. So take it in any order you want.
All right, I'll just start briefly, and then we'll pass it around. So, nuclear plant permitting is very local. It does start, you cannot do it top down. It has to be bottoms up. The community has to want it and be engaged and go to the meetings and be like, yes, we want it. And when there are, people will be there who are going to say, that's toxic, that's killing us all, and we need to stop it. And somehow that has to be, science has to prevail. And that will require people like you going down there and being like, no, actually, 8 million people are dying per year from air pollution from non-nuclear, and so we want the better choice. And so I think it really will require active participation from people who want nuclear plants. From you guys, if you want that electricity, it's not going to be brought to you. You're going to kind of have to get it. And I will say that the premier nuclear policy and advocacy group is in the room. Generation Atomic is based in Minneapolis, so call them up, and they'll help you get involved in activism at the local or state or national level. They're great.
I will take sort of a commercial angle on this, because that's a lot of what I've been talking about tonight. So the last nuclear power plant built in the United States, Vogtle Plant, Georgia, it was billions of dollars over budget. It was years over schedule. And candidly, the industry has a hangover because of that plant. I was in the room with a utility CEO who is supportive of nuclear energy, and he said, if I announced on an earnings call that I was going to build another nuclear power plant in the United States, my stock would take a 20% hit the next day. What this means is that we will likely need some new models for building those next plants. This is what we were talking about before with the private sector contracting for them and all of this stuff. That will also mean that it may take some new models in the regulatory arena in terms of how the costs for those plants are recovered, how utilities are involved. I believe very strongly that everything going on with AI fundamentally requires the participation of utilities to solve. We're not going to bypass utilities. They actually do a very good job of running the grid in the United States, which is one of the most incredible engineering feats in the history of mankind. So, but we are going to have to do some creative thinking. And whenever a utility gets in front of a regulator, having the support of people in the community for those types of ideas, I think, is ultimately very important. And it may not just be regulatory. It may also require some policy intervention, which is boots on the ground local politics. I think actually at the federal level, until right now, the Biden administration was arguably the most supportive administration for nuclear energy in decades. So they did a lot of good stuff. Trump is obviously doing a lot of stuff right now on nuclear, so we got a lot of good stuff going on at the federal level, but state and local matters a lot too.
Are there any role models? I mean, are there certain states? Peter, you probably know this, maybe, or maybe any of you know. Do you that like, boy, this state or that state? Now, I'm guessing maybe Texas because they have so much investment in energy. But are there any states that are just like way moving ahead and they're a good role model for the rest of us?
I mean, a lot of states, a growing number of states have taken on a perspective that they want to be a pro-nuclear environment. Texas is an example, Wyoming is an example, there are others. And so I think that, Nick, I mean, coming from TerraPower, you could probably talk a little bit about some of your experiences. Like, there are states that really want this and they are saying, doors open, bring this here. And then, of course, there are also states which are saying never. So we see both.
Yeah, Texas comes to mind. Mm-hmm. Texas has very active state-level legislation, including funding and hosting a bunch of advanced reactor prototypes on Texas land or at the Texas State University. So that's certainly the one that comes to mind. And then, yeah, TerraPower is building a reactor in Wyoming. The community had a coal plant that was shutting down. The whole town was somehow connected to the coal plant, and so getting some other plant is a very popular idea. Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, yeah, Texas is a good role model for pro-nuclear.
Well, I was really surprised if getting ready for the spring program. You think of Texas as oil, which of course it is, but incredible renewables because of wind energy in the West, and then huge sites for data centers. So I mean, they're kind of playing in all the arenas. Pål Arne, how about in Europe? You just told us that your strength is regulatory fights. So
there's probably 50, 60 PhDs written about how brilliant Norway was able to utilize its oil and gas resources. So, but I think one key point, one success factor, if we draw upon the experiences from oil and gas in Norway, how we developed this, was that there was a distinction between, on the one side, the government, the regulatory bodies, setting the overall framework conditions, the overall requirements for the sector for development, while it was the oil and gas companies that chose the technical solutions. I was working closely, actually back in 2014, 2015, with the former Minister of Petroleum and Energy in Norway in Parliament, where this was no longer the case. So for decades, we had this distinction. What happened was that there was a private law proposal in Parliament from the Socialist Left Party. At that time, very precarious parliamentary situation. Minority government had to seek support among several parties, center-right. So there was a law proposal from the opposition dictating basically which kind of solutions, technical solutions, the oil and gas companies should choose with regards to electrification. So when you have politicians starting to meddle with the technical solutions, that basically breached that consensus that we had for decades in Norway. So I think we need to have, also with nuclear, I think we need to have very clear, well-defined roles. Of course, that will not undermine innovation, technology, R&D, etc. The other part that I'd like to draw attention to is that I mentioned in my presentation Norwegian nuclear energy was an organization set up 3 years ago, have on the one side done a tremendous job in drawing attention to nuclear SMR, signing MOUs with 10, 15 companies ranging from Rolls-Royce to DL Energy, Korea Hydronuclear, etc. But I'm constantly telling the CEO that don't fall into the trap of making this an echo chamber, because you need to address also the difficult questions. And the domestic dimension of this, just to let you know, is that CEO of Norwegian Nuclear is saying that, no, we will not need subsidies. That's very good. Offshore wind will need subsidies. Whether that is the case when we have SMRs in Norway eventually 2035, 2040, I don't know. But what I do know is that one of the strongest proponents of SMR and nuclear in the Norwegian parliament is also the political party that is the most critical to the industry that demands subsidies. Just to complicate matters.
You're going to have an interesting decade or two ahead of you. Nick, I got 5 questions about thorium, so
Okay.
I have to bend to the will of the audience. So I don't know anything about thorium, but anyway, but they all are around will thorium be a safe alternative to uranium? So I take it it's another natural resource to be, well anyway, will you answer the 5 people that want to know?
Yes. So.
And
yeah.
also, is it involved in recycling? Because we get a lot of questions about, can you recycle the waste? Anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so thorium has taken the nuclear information world by storm. It's become extremely popular and interesting. It's an interesting thing that's happened. So thorium is another element, just a few smaller than uranium. You can't split a thorium atom directly like you can with uranium. But if you put thorium in one of these breeder reactors I was talking about earlier, you can actually, the first neutron goes in, turns thorium into something else, uranium-233, and then the second neutron will split it. So you need 2 neutrons to split thorium as opposed to 1 with uranium. But there's this whole world of information that says well, thorium reactors can't melt down. Their waste is much cleaner. They're much cheaper. The only reason we didn't build them was because they couldn't make nuclear weapons. These things are all said. Every time I say I'm a nuclear engineer, people come to me and they're like, well, let's just use thorium. Most of those are a little bit of myths. There isn't that much truth to those. There's some truth. There's a whole page on my website called Thorium Myths. There's a thorium, here's the story about thorium, here's the thorium myths. It kind of breaks them down and why some of those things you've heard aren't quite totally true. But what people are really comparing, what they do is they say, here's uranium in a conventional non-breeder reactor. Look, it makes bad waste, it doesn't last that long, and then here's thorium in a breeder reactor, and they talk about all the benefits of breeder reactors. You get much more energy, much less waste, the waste doesn't last as long, and it can be safer because it's running at a lower pressure. But it's not a thorium versus uranium thing. What they're really comparing there is non-breeder reactors, which can be made with uranium or thorium, non-breeder reactors, which are only made with uranium, versus breeder reactors, which can be made with either uranium or thorium. So they always leave out the fact that there are also uranium breeder reactors that have most of those same benefits. So it's a little bit nuanced. It's kind of in the weeds, but the overall story is if someone tells you that thorium is a thing that solves all the problems, that's not quite true. But breeder reactors and low pressure reactors may have some advantages, whether they use uranium or thorium.
Got that?
Yeah.
Peter,
go to the thorium myths.
We are dangerously close to the end of our Q&A. And Peter, I have a question for you. You're in the private equity world, or the investment world. So what are the investment opportunities in this transition, if we do? Do you see this as there'll be a real rush of capital to invest in these either reactors or the plants? Is it not only if they get guarantees that they won't lose anything? What's going to be the future of investment in this from the private sector?
So I think that there's a lot of interest, and we've certainly seen venture capital interest in some of the startup generation technology companies. So venture capital has a much higher risk appetite. On sort of the traditional infrastructure private equity side, I think it's a little bit early. There is still a perception that the risk profile is too significant to put significant amounts of money in. There's a lot of different tools, policy tools, financial tools that people are thinking about in order to bridge some of that. But ultimately, if you're talking about building reactors at the scale that we would need to build to sort of keep up with some of the AI stuff, we will absolutely need private sources of capital in the market in order to do that. And there are significant pools of infrastructure capital that know how to get really big projects paid for. So I think that the connections will happen. I also think that we have a few steps along the way before we get there. So it'll be interesting to sort of see how that'll work. I will say I spent a number of months last year sort of thinking about the financing of nuclear reactors. And I think the truth is, because so little work has been done on these things, and certainly so little work has been done outside of the utility, like I get the cost recovered from my ratepayers framework, that there hasn't been a lot of innovative work happening on any of this. I would ask people questions, and you sort of peel back one or two layers of the onion, and there just wasn't anything interesting happening there. So the ways in which we build and finance large-scale projects in the United States and globally are really sophisticated. There's a lot of creativity. We figure out how to move a lot of money towards big, important things. And I think we can get there with nuclear. We're going to have to get over a variety of some of those hangover issues, those Vogel hangover issues, and some of these other things. But it will be a significant opportunity if we can clear some of those early hurdles.
Just a little follow-up on that. We've just come through like 20 years of getting the renewable energy marketplace going. Is there anything we learned from that? I mean, where we squandered the first 10 years, and we could, if we didn't do that, we could move. I mean, anything?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, actually, like, I would go to these financing nuclear conferences, have those conversations. And the first thing I would do is put them in touch with project finance attorneys that work on renewable energy.
Oh, okay. So
because there are a lot of things that you can do that translate over. I will also say in other parts of the world, in the United Arab Emirates in Abu Dhabi, they built the most recent large-scale nuclear reactor. It's 4 units. It's 5.6 gigawatts. It's massive. It came in on budget and on time. Like, it's possible. And of course, there's quite a lot of sovereign wealth in the Middle East, and so much of that was financed with that money, but there are other large pools of capital that are interested in working on this.
Pål Arne, I hate to ask your last question to be such a downer, but it's a good question. I mean, people want to know. In the event of war or an expansion of the Ukraine war to other areas, are there systems in place to prevent the sabotage of nuclear power plants and stuff in Europe? Do you feel they're secure enough? Are they at risk?
That's a very good question. I would say no. And the reason for saying no is that what we have seen the last year and a half, is that we've seen a dramatic situation with the interruption of critical infrastructure cables in Northern Europe. And we have not been able to identify who is behind. We are very certain, but we have not made clear evidence. We've not been able to put down clear evidence. The other very recent development to this that I was actually witnessing on my way here has to do with how easily the backbone of our economy is interrupted, where drones, most likely sent up from part of the Russian shadow fleet international waters, are able to close down major hubs, airports in Europe just like that. So it might sound dramatic, but I think at the moment we are too naive. And I think we are not realizing the investments that are needed to protect critical infrastructure.
That's why the person asked it, I think. We're going to end with just a yes or no or raise your hand. And we'll just, each of you one at a time. 15 years from now, do you think we will have a pretty robust nuclear energy industry? In other words, our program tonight is not if but when. Again, we're not proponents or non-proponents, but we're just questioning, in your judgment, do you think we will see an expansion of nuclear energy to be a provider of energy for all of the growth of technology and the other demands that we have? Pål Arne, I'll start with you. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And you all can decide for yourselves.
But there's one important
Yes?
comment to that. I have some old bumper stickers from Congress. Drill, baby, drill. Build, baby, build.
Build, baby, build. Okay.
Split baby.
All righty. Well, first of all, I want to thank our speakers for just an excellent program. So let's give them all a big round of applause. This was not on the table just as an icebreaker to get you all wondering what it was. But anyway, we have for each of you, and we will send it to you. We'll ship it to you. You don't have to explain to the TSA fellow what this is. This is a Viking ale bowl, and it is a traditional Scandinavian symbol of community, celebration, and coming to the table for peace and togetherness. So, and they are hand thrown in southern Minnesota by the Touran family. So these are yours, and I hope you'll share it with friends and family and put it in a place, and always remember us and remember this evening. So anyway.
Thanks so much.
And Nick, your box is going to have in it a little something for little Miss Ray.
Okay.
A memory of Minnesota.
Wonderful.
So a little Minnesota souvenir. So I hope she enjoys it.
Yes, thank you.
Alrighty. Well, thank you all on behalf of the Norway Board and its executive team, including Christina Carlton, the CEO and President of the Norway House. Christina, stand up, please. And the whole Norway House team, Anya, Inger-Lisa, Omar, Lena, John, Theo, and Max. If you're here, stand up. And that team supports not only making this a wonderful program here for those of you who are here in person, but they also manage the webinar. Mark Knapp, please stand. There we go. And no, Mark, you have to stay standing. It's part of the job. Mark is the chairman of our Minnesota Peace Initiative Committee. And we all of us on the committee and all of us at the Norway House, thank him very much for his leadership. And I also want to thank all the committee members. And will any of the committee members here stand? Don't be shy, George. We have a great committee. We have a lot of fun. We really, really enjoy putting these programs together. So if any of you are interested in joining the committee or learning anything more about it, just see us afterwards or any time that works for you. I encourage you to visit the Norway House website. This webinar tonight will be there shortly. And you can also learn a lot more about the Norway House, its mission, and its upcoming events. And speaking of upcoming events, Håkon, Crown Prince of Norway, will join us at the Norway House on Tuesday, October 7th. It's a very jam-packed visit, so do look on the website for pictures and all the follow-up from his visit, and also just a list of the activities. On November 12th, former Wisconsin Senator Russ Feingold, who served as the president of the American Constitution Society from March of 2020 to March of 2025, will be joined by Judge Jack Touran and a committee member of ours, Tom Hansen, to discuss the current state of democracy in our country. And it's my great pleasure to be the moderator for that program as well. 2026 will be the 20th anniversary of the Minnesota Peace Initiative. Thank you. I guess it's a little like when you send your first child off to college and you go, where did the years go? My gosh. With all of your support, and many of you I know have been here for many, many, many of the programs, we have really grown our program, and it is a very important part of the Norway House's commitment to peace. And to celebrate our 20th anniversary, we have put together a Minnesota Peace Initiative video, which is kind of a composite of the highlights over the past 20 years. And you can look forward to that soon on the Norway House website. I'm going to tell you, it's a very humbling experience to see yourself over 20 years. You really realize that you can't lie to yourself anymore. So anyway, in addition, we are also launching a new program, which I mentioned this past spring, as part of the Norway House Peace Program, and it is the Global Peace Forum, or GPF, and it is launching in 2026. And the goal of GPF is to build an annual peace conference focused on the most important global peace issues of the day. And we have a committee that's very busy working and planning and fundraising and just doing everything we need to get it launched in September of 2026. And as we know, 2026 is a big year for a lot of reasons, including the 250th anniversary of the founding of our country. So, as you leave tonight, I want you to know how much all of us who are involved in the Minnesota Peace Initiative appreciate your loyal support and attendance. We had terrific attendance tonight, and it just makes the whole event that much more dynamic and high energy when the room is full of interested people who want to know more about a subject, and that's why we're here. I invite you to learn more about the GPF as we get further into the year with that and what it could mean for the Norway House and for Minnesota. It is our goal to grow it into a well-recognized global peace event, and we intend to do it as hard as we can. We want to work with Norway and have a good exchange program between here and Norway as we work on this program. Minnesota has very deep Scandinavian roots, and they are the basis for our commitment to peace and peacemaking. So we think we have every right to say Minnesota is a logical place to welcome people from around the world to come and learn more about what each and every one of us can do to support a more peaceful world. So all of you have joined us in person and all you online. We thank you very much. We hope you will join us for future programs. I hope you've learned a lot tonight about the rising interest in nuclear power as a source of energy to provide clean, reliable energy for the rapid growth of technology. As I tell you every time, the Minnesota Peace Initiative was established because democracy is not a spectator sport. We believe We believe everyone needs to be informed and engaged to support our democracy. Please join us next spring, and if it's happening in the news, we'll be talking about it at the Minnesota Peace Initiative. Good night, and take care, and stay safe. Thank you.
That's very nice, guys. Yeah, thank you. That was great. Yeah, really great question. Such a pleasure. Thank you.